President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has warned that Russia is preparing to unleash a new wave of strikes on Ukraine as utility crews rush to restore power to areas devastated by recent bombardments. Millions remain without electricity as a result of relentless shelling on the country's energy infrastructure. Blackouts have persisted in most regions, including in the capital, Kyiv. Ukraine's armed forces say the threat of airstrikes on more critical facilities remains. And they also expect Russia will start to plug its military losses by redeploying units currently stationed in Belarus.
Ми розуміємо, що терористи готують нові удари. Ми це точно знаємо. І поки у них є ракети, вони не заспокояться, на жаль. Але наша здатність допомагати один одному і дбати про тих, кому найскладніше, про літніх людей дбати, про сім'ї з дітьми, про тих, у кого війна забрала і дім, і рідних. Наша взаємодопомога є одним з елементів захисту від терору і є нашою силою.
While Kherson was liberated by Ukrainian troops earlier this month, the southern city continues to suffer daily bombardments by Russian soldiers. Over the weekend, Moscow used multiple rocket launches, causing widespread damage. Officials have now been evacuating elderly citizens still in Kherson.
Херсон – це може бути зараз Маріуполь номер 2. І зараз потрібно вивезти побільше людей, бо зараз будуть обстріли, а також нема світла, нема толком води, нема їжі. Потрібна допомога. Потрібна допомога в ліках, потрібна допомога в лікарнях. Це дуже зараз потрібно людям. Повинні ми зараз максимально зробити все, щоб наші люди були в теплі і були забезпечені всім.
Meanwhile, the Pentagon is considering a Boeing proposal to supply Ukraine with cheap, small precision bombs fitted onto abundantly available rockets. They say this will allow Ukraine to strike far behind Russian lines. The West has been struggling to meet Kyiv's demands for more arms as the war drags on. US and allied military inventories are shrinking, and Ukraine faces a need for more sophisticated weapons. Well, European Union ministers, meanwhile, have just met in Brussels to discuss aid and development issues with the Ukraine war and global food insecurity in sharp focus. Rosie Burchard standing by for us live from Brussels. Rosie, winter is looming. Did the EU ministers agree on what kind of aid would be sent to Ukraine?
Well, EU ministers are just wrapping up their talks here in Brussels, and Ukraine certainly was top of their agenda, of course, as those Russian attacks raining down on Ukrainian cities and plunging parts of the country into darkness. Now, the EU's High Representative Josep Borrell said that there needs to be some urgent action on this. Take a listen to what Josep Borrell had to say on his way into these talks.
In Ukraine, we have to increase our support, putting continuous bombing Ukraine, putting continuous trying to make Ukraine a black hole, no light, no electricity, no heating, to put the Ukrainians into the darkness and the cold. So we have to continue our support, providing more material for the Ukrainians to face the winter without electricity. It means a lot of things, from electricity appliances to everything that someone is needed to pass the winter without electricity.
Now, the European Union has tried to show Ukraine that it's really in this for the long term. It has already planned to allocate roughly 1.5 billion euros per month in 2023 in aid in terms of urgent liquidity needs, so what they call macro financial assistance. That really means helping Ukraine to keep its economy afloat, to keep paying teachers and doctors and nurses. But now, of course, EU ministers are looking at these very urgent short-term needs. They're looking at, for example, temporary housing, also generators, for example, to help keep the lights on in Ukrainian households and cities. But I also managed to speak to Poland's foreign minister, and he says he's expecting more pressure on the Polish border. Of course, they're expecting expecting more Ukrainian refugees to come into the European Union because of these Russian attacks. He is asking for more EU support from other countries, to those countries, including Poland, which are taking in most Ukrainian refugees. Now, just to note, no direct agreement on any sort of sum or figure here today at this meeting. European countries are also doing bilateral donations, but certainly plenty of talks of support to Ukraine as the winter really looms. Temperatures drop below freezing in many cases, and as the lights go off in homes across the country.
Rosie, we're also hearing global food insecurity was high on the agenda, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And I think this focus on Ukraine has led to some concern that the EU may be diverted from its goals and its commitments when it comes to supporting countries, particularly in Africa, and when it comes to EU-Africa relations. Now, we've seen the war in Ukraine and in terms of its fallout having a really dire impact on countries around the world, particularly when it comes to food security. Ukraine is a major producer of food. It's a major producer of grain, but also sunflower oil. Now, the European Union has not been inactive on this front. At the G20 in Bali recently, they allocated hundreds of millions of euros in support to countries most affected, many of which are in Africa. And they've also been looking at trying to up shipments of Ukrainian grain, so also allocating more funds when it comes to actually getting that grain out of Ukraine into countries which need them. And beyond these very concerning fears about actual famines, there is also another level of fear here, which is a geopolitical one, with the European Union fearing it may be losing a battle in terms of communication, particularly with the African continent, because Russia is certainly pushing a line there that it's the EU's fault, that it's the fault of European and Western sanctions, that there is such food insecurity on the African continent. While the EU has a different view. It says that Russia is the only reason for this food insecurity, and it's down to Russia invading Ukraine, and that is what's calling these global fallouts. The European Union says Russia is trying to use hunger as a weapon.
All right, thanks for that. Rosie Burchard reporting from Brussels.